To make the quilt, what you need is you need 9.5-inch squares, 3.5-inch squares in 2 different colors to make your 9 patches, your 9 patchwork, 9 square patchwork, and just the plain 9.5-inch squares. And then for the baby size, you're going to need 68 white or light colored 3.5-inch squares and 49 dark color. Here I'm using pink 3.5-inch squares, and additionally you're going to need 12 9.5-inch squares, and then you need a bit of yardage in, I'm using pink, white and green for my flower, and you're going to need your template, your applique template. I'm going to show you in a few minutes how to put that together, and then you need the template to actually use underneath your white or light colored square so that you can place your applique in the right position. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, I've printed out my 2 templates. This one is for placing the pieces of applique once you've made them, and then you're going to use this underneath your block so that you can place it evenly. Okay, so we're going to put these together. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so what you need to do is first check your square. This square must be 4 centimeters square, and you know that you've got your template correctly sized, and then you want to cut off the right hand strip. Here we've only got 2 pieces of each, and then you're going to use stick glue to stick that together. So each page is numbered. In the top right hand corner, my right hand corner, and there's a little circle on the side which helps you to align it, to stick it together. So we have the templates glued together, and the way you want to cut this particular template is you want to cut it so that if you take your 9.5-inch square, that it's going to line up on the top. You only have to cut straight side, straight top, where you want it to line up. So that's how we've done that. And then number 1, before you start cutting anything, press all your fabric that you're going to be using for the applique and for the strips for the quilt. Once you've cut, to cut the actual squares for the quilt, you're going to use strips of fabric. We're going to use strips of fabric. Cut strips of fabric by the width of your fabric, and then subcut it into 3.5-inch squares. But before you do anything, press your fabric, and press the fabric that you're going to be using for your applique as well. Then the way we're going to do this is you're going to use some interfacing. I've used interfacing or any kind of tracing medium to trace off your pieces, and then we're going to cut it out of cardboard. We're going to make a cardboard template, which makes it a lot easier and a lot more accurate when you're going to draw around it, to cut out your applique, to sew your applique. Once you've made your templates, you've made your cardboard templates, you're going to draw your shapes onto your fabric. You must leave enough space for seam allowance, at least 1/4 inch space for seam allowance around each shape. And then you just want to draw it with disappearing pen or with tailor's chalk. I like tailor's chalk because it gives you a nice line, a nice, wide line or broad line, if you like, to stitch on for your stitching guide. So for this quilt, you need 8 applique sets, and you need 32 petals, and you need 16 leaves and 8 flower centers. You need to stitch on the line right around the shape, and then you don't need to stitch at the very bottom of the shape. That you can leave open because that's under the little white flower center. Once you've finished sewing your shapes, we're now going to cut it out on any part that is underneath another section. For instance, the petals, you can leave an opening. When it's something on top, you want to sew the entire shape all the way around, and we're going to show you how we handle that. We're going to cut a seam allowance, very, very narrow seam allowance. You can nick into it, but the closer you actually cut it to the shape, the less nicking inside of the seam that you have to do to ease the curve. So I'm easing the curve in 4 places. Be very careful not to cut your stitching line, okay? And then you want to cut a very, very neat, because it's white, you want to cut a very neat slit in the middle of the bag. You can actually measure it. Going to cut that. Needs a little bit more. Needs a bit more. Just to get the scissors in. There we go. And now we're going to turn that to the right side. You can use a crochet hook. It's a pretty good tool to use to actually turn it to the right side. We're going to turn them all, and then we'll come back and press them. So the leaves, you make your slits. And turn it to the right side. Use your crochet hook to push out your points. Don't cut it so close to the edge, actually, but it's still fine. Okay, there we go. Your leaf, okay, and then your petals, just want to show you where there's a point, you want to nick it in to the point and then turn it round in the same manner as the rest of it. Now it's time to use your template and we did it, lining up the top and the sides, the straight line. That's how we want to do it. And that just gives us some idea of where we're going to place our applique pieces so that it's nice and straight. And now what you're going to do is you're going to pin that in place, and then you're going to stitch it close to the edge of the applique piece. And obviously you're going to add this after you finish sewing your petals on. This was sewn in white just for demonstration purposes. Obviously you must use a matching thread, which is going to give you a much nicer finish. We'll come back and give you the result of this sewn on. Just one tip I didn't mention, you must press your applique before you sew it onto your square. So press each piece nicely before you pin it on and before you sew it on. Take the strips that you've made and subcut them into 3.5 inch squares. And you need, as we mentioned before, 68 in white and 49 in pink for the entire quilt. This is a 9-patch. There are 3 different types, or 3 different 9 patches, and you want to put each patch together before you start working with it, before you start sewing it. So start with one type of block. I'm going to start with the step block, and each block has 9 pieces to it. So, and of the step blocks, this is a step block, what I call a step block. You need 4 of each of these. You have one going this way, and you have one going that way, and then you have the middle block. So start by making 4 of these. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to sew one row at a time and then join it. Once you have completed each row, you want to press it, and you're going to press the first line Ouch. Don't stretch your seams. When you press it, you're going to press the first row out. You're going to press the next row in. And the following row out. So, and the reason for that is that when you come to sew these together, you will be able to nest your seams very nicely. Once you've finished pressing it, you're going to block this to 3.5 wide, 3.5 wide by 9.5 long. Once you've blocked each row to 9.5 by 3.5, you're now going to sew those rows together and you're going to nest. You're going to nest those seams, and my parrot is helping me. My parrot is helping me do the quilting. Once you've finished sewing your block, press it and block it to 9.5 inches square. Lay out all the other blocks. You're going to need 5 of these, 4 of these, and 4 of these. You're going to block this to 9.5 inches square, and then we're going to start assembling the quilt according to the diagram. Once you've constructed all your 9-patch blocks and you have checked the size and blocked them, it's time to start constructing your quilt. Now, the most important thing is if, for instance, you end up with your 9-patch block being slightly smaller than the 9.5 inches it's supposed to measure at, which can happen. It can happen so easily. Do not be tempted to sew this quilt together. You then need to block your patchwork, your applique blocks and your plain blocks to the same size as your 9-patch, and all your blocks must match the same size. If you don't do that step, you're going to end up with a wobbly quilt and you won't be able to fix it once you've started to do that. So the first step is to press all your blocks that you've completed perfectly, check your size, block your size, and make sure that your plain blocks and your applique blocks match your patchwork, and then we can start constructing the quilt. Once you've completed the crucial step of blocking all your squares and making sure that everything matches, you can start constructing the final construction of the top of the quilt top. And I recommend that you press it again because you've been working with it, and then lay it out according to the diagram. And you're going to start by sewing your rows together in rows. Once the rows are constructed, you're then going to lay each row on top of the other one and you're going to do your seam across the entire width of your quilt. And then once that is completed, you're going to press your quilt top and you're going to de-thread it. That is also absolutely crucial, that you take all the threads off the quilt top and press it as well as you possibly can before you start with your sandwiching, basting, quilting and binding. And those steps are all in further videos that we have on our channel and are linked in the description for the instructions for this quilt.